Hello and welcome, F5 community, to This Month in Security. I'm your host, Aubrey King, and joining me this month, we've got Aaron Brailsford.
We, F5, achieved provider status for both CVSS and CWE recently, which is quite a big deal. We have to work to maintain that, but that's quite a big deal.
Sander Vinberg.
I think it's great, Aaron. You just sort of answered the question everybody's wondered, which is like, is 2 hours a long time or a short time in the world of exposed creds? And now we all know it's a really, really long time.
And special guest, Ben Edwards from the Cyentia Institute.
And if you look at the log4j, the CVE is big. Like, there's a lot of entries, but it's not as big as it should be.
We'll be talking about some of the latest security news and diving into Sander and Ben's forthcoming talk at RSA, the future of threat prediction, and much, much more. So strap on those earbuds and get ready for This Month in Security.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me this month again. You know, we've got Sander and Aaron, who I'm sure the community knows pretty well, but we've also got a guest this month. So we are welcoming in Ben Edwards from Cyentia. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on. And I guess just to kind of start things off, actually, let's just kind of give the user community an understanding of who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm a data scientist, and I think my title is technically senior data scientist. So it says right there on the thing. I work for a company called the Cyentia Institute, and we are essentially a research consulting company. So we're founded by Wade Baker and Jay Jacobs, who you might know from the data breach investigation report. Wade is kind of the godfather of the DBIR for Verizon. After kind of, a few years in the wilderness for both of them, they both got together and decided, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could do that fantastic kind of research for everybody? So not just for Verizon, but everybody's got great data. Let's get that data together and kind of make these results available to the community. So I had met Jay in school, and he was like, hey man, do you want to come work for our company? And I said, yeah, sure. And so, what we do is we primarily work with cybersecurity vendors like F5, but we've worked with Cisco and Kenna, who are now the same thing, Veracode, a company that Elevate Security, too many to name. You can go on our website and look. But essentially, we help them understand their data better, help the community get access to some of the interesting findings of that data that are useful and out there. And so we do all kinds of that data-driven, nice visualization, great reports. Companies get a nice glossy thing and thought leadership, and we get to serve the community. So that's what Cyentia is. I am the data scientist, so I'm the guy who gets the data and kind of stirs around the linear algebra for a while until good numbers pop out, and then maybe make some nice visualizations. And so that's what we do. And we got lucky enough to work with F5. I think we're going to talk to you a little bit about that later today on the podcast.
Yeah, I think that's great. You guys actually, Sander, and you did a report together, CVE report. Like you said, we'll talk about it a little bit later. And also, you guys are going to be at RSA coming up and doing a talk on that, correct?
Yeah. So Sander and I are talking, Tuesday morning at RSA. So if you're going to be at Moscone, definitely come and check us out. We're going to give a lot of the results from that report, plus some other ones. Sander has provided the actual interesting security stuff, whereas I just do the numbers. So Sander, do you have a pitch for our talk? What's our pitch?
I mean, the vast majority of it is really going to be diving into kind of what you can learn about vulnerabilities, but also the way we talk about vulnerabilities. And the study really that Ben authored is really deep. Like, it covers it from a ton of angles. So the vast majority of the time, we're going to be exploring all these different angles. Ben also sort of introduced a theme in the report, which is just like weird things about CVEs. And so in all of the sort of rigorous data science, there's also kind of like didn't know this about the CVE system before. And so we're going to make sure to kind of include that, because it really will sort of change the way you see the whole thing. At the end a little bit, what I'm going to do is kind of thread out some of the ramifications that I see given many of the trends that Ben has identified. And I want to sort of connect that up with some other trends that we see in terms of application and enterprise architecture, and maybe point to a sort of higher level problem that I think is something that we're going to want to be taking care of in the next couple of years. So we're going to tie it into the bigger picture a little bit, but we're going to make sure to spend enough time to like really, really be some data nerds.
Very cool. I'm so excited. I didn't know if my badge was going to get me access first, but I sorted that out, and it looks like I'll be able to be there and get a camera up in your face somehow from the crowd. So I'm excited for that. We'll definitely be covering it from RSA. We got a bunch of stuff planned for RSA.
Yeah.
But I guess before we get into that, we do have some news as usual. And starting out, Aaron, I was blown away by your This Week in Security on community.f5.com this past week. It was pretty cool. That Outlook CVE one really caught my eye. Would you care to kind of elaborate and get us started on the happenings?
Yeah, so this was the hot news of maybe 2 weeks ago. CVE 2023-23397, speaking of CVEs. It's an elevation of privilege or potential elevation of privilege in Microsoft Outlook. And it's, I think I said this in This Week in Security, this whole thing falls under the heading of why on earth did that feature exist in the first place? It turns out that the sender of an email, it can be an email or a calendar reminder or a task, can specify the sound they want the recipient to hear when the reminder fires.
Yeah, MySpace style.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how have we not been rickrolling each other for years with this thing? But anyway, it turns out that Outlook will happily load that sound on the target's client from wherever, including an SB share out on the internet, which it will helpfully try and authenticate to, allowing, a remote attacker outside of your network who has an SMB server set up, which is pretty trivial, to steal hashes and execute basically a pass the hash attack. A fix came out for this pretty quickly. There was an updated Outlook client within a day or so.
Yeah, thankfully that kind of stuff should be easy to fix, right? Like remove this feature that no one has ever used in their entire life, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I assumed that fix would do, but it turned out that based on some testing some folks did, the fix for the Outlook client actually just stops Outlook from reaching out to remote hosts. It will still go to a host on the local network. If you give it a NetBIOS name, it will still happily do that. Microsoft think it's a brilliant fix.
Yeah.
They subsequently released the March 2023 security update for Exchange, and that removes the property, right? So you can no longer specify the property in the email, which... And I looked this up right before we started recording. Microsoft lists simply as a defense in depth update needed for this CVE, which, they say that, I say this is the fix for that CVE.
Yeah, I noticed that same thing. I just thought that was like a bold choice of words to call it the defense fix. I thought that was great.
Yeah, I don't know. The whole thing blew my mind. I wonder how long this feature has existed for. I'm going to go out on a limb and probably say a very long time. This feels like something that dates back to the early days of Outlook. And wouldn't it be cool if we could play noises on other people's computers?
And just a different philosophy about tech and software, right? It's like, this is from an earlier age when we were all more naive or something.
I got a funny story about playing sounds on other people's computers real quick, if you don't mind. Did any of you guys ever work on Sun machines?
I know exactly where you're going with this.
So Sun Microsystems had the feature ping-A. It was an audible ping, right? So if I pinged my buddy's machine, it would beep, 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 beep. So I had a couple guys that I worked with and Steve Yagi, if you're out there, I got you with this and I'd never told you about it. I watched this guy walk into the data center and I'd whipped up a script that did a ping-A on every one of his servers, all of them at the same time. And it was just nonstop. So he walked into his, and I watched on the camera. So as soon as he gets in the aisle, I hit the script and beep, 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 beep. It's just amazing. The look on his face was great. He's like, what's going on? Everything's burning. Okay, I'm sorry. I had to tell that story. And again, Steve, I'm sorry if I did that to you and scared you too bad.
I wasn't counting on an on-air confession. But that's what we just got. Right. That's gold. I love it.
Right. I think that's a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act violation called district attorney and states and federal DA. Whoever handles that.
It's just friendly coworker.
Is there a statute of limitations on that?
I would hope so. That's a long time ago too. Yikes.
I'll just jump in and say that I read a lot of the notes about threat hunting for this thing and looking for indicators of compromise. And it was actually really interesting how many really stealthy techniques were noticed. And Microsoft themselves said that their own incident response folks were looking through logs that later turned out to have been to contain indicators of compromise, and they didn't even find anything on the first couple tries. So if you've been working on this and you've been reading those notes, I was just kind of shocked how stealthy and kind of persistent everything was. It was I mean, obviously a really simple vuln, but the ways that people were able to weaponize it very quickly was kind of surprised me in its sophistication.
Yeah, and actually you say about weaponizing it, there were reports that this had been exploited as far back as April 2022.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right, so that's a year's worth of stealthy exploitation.
Yeah.
It's bad.
I missed that part. That makes it a little scarier. Any of these things that have been like sitting around there for a while just cooking, that makes me nervous. Like, what have I done? You know, what did I miss? What's going on in my
That's what keeps security exciting, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Now, you know, speaking of excitement, there was another big one that hit really recently. The Git SSH keys shifted, right? Like they have the huge, you know, announcement on the website and whatnot. I didn't get to read a ton about the why. I saw that there was a quick leak, but their reaction was pretty cool, eh?
Yeah, they leaked their RSA key for maybe 2.5 hours, I think, something like that. It was part of a planned migration, I believe, and you know the key ended up in the wrong place in a public repository for, like I say, about 2.5 hours. And so, in their words, out of an abundance of caution, they rolled new keys.
I did not know about this until I tried to push something and it was like, wait a second. And what happened? I had to check with one of my colleagues to be like, did something weird happen? What's going on? But yeah, imagine that was most users found out about that way as they went to go push and it's like, oh, no, that's not right.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is this not functioning? I think so. I read this, I don't know, maybe a day or so after it happened. And because I don't typically push code to public GitHub, so I'm like insulated from that, right? I just read about it in the news. And my first thought was, I don't know, a couple of hours. That's a pretty small window of opportunity, right? For someone to notice a key in a repository and actually steal it and then plan to do something with it. But a few days after I read that article, I read another one, an article from a guy called Chris Farris. He intentionally leaked an AWS key, right? He intentionally put it out there to see what would happen with it. Within 10 minutes, it was being used by bad guys, right? By people that you don't know who they are. There were two things stood out in that article to me. One was that within, I think it was like 2 minutes, maybe under 2 minutes, AWS themselves noticed it and were pinging him. They also used credentials that should not have, they used the leaked key, I think it was, which should not have had permission to do something to manipulate his AWS account. And within 10 minutes, it had been picked up by actual threat actors who were doing stuff with it, like surveying what they can get to and enumerating what they can do with this leaked credential, which made me think about the GitHub key, right? Yeah. When I read that, I thought 2.5 hours. What's going to happen? Well, apparently 2.5 hours. It's like, 2 hours, 25 minutes too long, which means there must be a massive scale stuff continually looking for leaked secrets and doing stuff with them. And I imagine even if you're going to target stuff, it's I don't know what organization at GitHub it was under, but certainly if I was a bad guy, I'm not, those are the ones I'd be scanning, right? Like big public orgs. I want to see their public repos. I'm going to scrape that every 10 minutes to look for secrets. Yeah.
One of the things that I do at labs is I look at lots and lots of untargeted scanning, and we see people scanning for AWS credentials all the time. I mean, it's like one of it is more common than any identified CVE that we ever see. So I also think my guess, if I had to say, is that there are some really, really massive scale scanning orgs, and then there's just an incredible volume of randos, not actually at huge scale, but just there's so many of them. And everybody's just kind of looking for this all the time. So yeah, I mean, I think it's great, Aaron. You just sort of answered the question everybody's wondered, which is is 2 hours a long time or a short time in the world of exposed creds? And now we all know it's a really, really long time.
Yeah, it's a really long time. What I thought about this was I've known for years, if you stick a box on the internet and expose port 22, stuff will be hitting SSH like that, right? Within minutes, if that. For whatever reason, I assumed there was less stuff looking for leaked credentials. Like that would happen less quickly. I don't know why I had that assumption, because now I know what I know and I say that out loud, I'm like, well, that's stupid. Why would I think that? Of course it's going to happen just as quickly, right? But it was new to me. So the next thing I saw, that this is like fresh out of yesterday, I think, 3CX VoIP software. There's supply chain compromise. This is bad. They have a lot of clients and a lot of big, like, blue chip clients, huge org. The National Health Service in the UK, for example, is one of their clients. It's not at all terrifying. It was noticed, and this sort of came to light in the news in the last day or so. And I'll go back a little bit in a minute, but in the last day or so, there were EDR and AV vendors saying, look, the packages, the update packages, the latest update of this software, if you either download it directly or the self-update fires, it's Trojanized. But not only is it Trojanized, it's Trojanized at source, right? So it's still signed. This is still valid, signed, should be good, rubber-stamped software from the vendor. That's bad. I mean, that's bad enough. If you do a little digging, though, this could have come to light maybe a week or so ago. We could probably put some links in the doobly-doo on YouTube and in the descriptions elsewhere. About a week ago, customers of 3CX were starting to post on their community support forums saying, the latest update's installed and like my antivirus is firing off alerts saying there's Trojans in it. That can't be right? There's a suggestion that 3CX's own support org, and this is unconfirmed, so don't sue me.
Let's speculate away.
But it's in their imprint on the internet. We're telling people, they're telling customers, like, this is a false positive. Put exceptions in your AV and EDR rules. Like, it's fine. Just ignore that. And it turns out it's not a false positive. It's actually a Trojan. It's pretty bad.
I haven't been able to sort of dig into this very much. Do they have any idea of kind of how the compromise, the backdoor got in there?
No, the most I've seen is that it's in the FFmpeg libraries that are included.
Oh, okay.
But so maybe this is a compromise up the chain.
Yeah.
But I've not seen any suggestion that, like, if you go and get libffmpeg right off GitHub, that's compromised. So that suggests it's inserted it into 3CX's supply chain somehow.
Wow.
But I don't think there's been any official response from them yet at the point of recording this. So I think that's going to unravel over the next weeks.
Like you said, MPEG libraries, that would be lit up in other places already too, I would think. I would imagine that'd be the first place you'd look for any other compromise with that one. So maybe
absolutely.
it's like
libffmpeg's in tons of stuff.
So that would be a good time to probably mention that we're probably working at DevCentral on an OWASP CI/CD pipeline threats series coming up soon. So to me, that is one of those things that that's very real now. If you can infect somebody's own pipeline right from the get-go, it's got to be impossible to get out.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest security threat that there is, right? It's compromising a large-scale vendor's software at source, because we trust our vendors.
Yep.
Right? We hope people trust us, and we trust, I trust the people that I download software for. If it's signed and it's coming from a legitimate source, like, and I'm not doing things like, I didn't Google for it and then click on the sponsored link, because there's a lot of malicious sponsored links inserted in Google results, right?
Yeah.
I went to the actual vendor's website and I downloaded the actual software, and I figure I've protected myself. And while in 99% of cases I have, there is still that element of risk.
Absolutely. Last thing I wanted to bring up was, before we get into the CVE report, is Linus Tech Tips got taken down this past week. So this was brought to my attention by Boo Lamb on my team. He said, "Oh my gosh, look at this, Aubrey. This is huge. This guy has all these subscribers." And the way it went down was pretty crazy. And I really loved that Linus got on YouTube and just tried to educate everyone with what happened exactly afterwards so that other people would watch out for the same kind of thing. And as I watched this 6-minute video that we will definitely put in the description here, he's talking about how one of the organization members that just is an admin on their YouTube channel being phished, and it looked really legit. Even Linus said it looked real legit. I would have probably done the same thing and got phished. They stole a cookie, and that was a successful session hijack within minutes. So since you don't have owner at that point, you just have an ad. If you have access as an admin to a YouTube console, that allows you to delete, which is scary. But so these bad actors took 3 channels that were owned by these guys, deleted absolutely everything, and then uploaded a scam video. Basically, Elon Musk cryptocurrency scam thing to try and get you to click and give your data. But amazing just how that whole thing happened. I mean, phished and then session hijacked. And again, they don't think that took very long either. And I love the way he just came forth and had to educate afterwards. I think that's important that, that we always get that kind of thing from any of these big hacks.
Especially when you have that platform, right? And he's got the nerd platform, and people love gadgets and all the stuff that he does. So if we can inject a little bit of security into all these people who are kind of maybe doing all the weird tech stuff that'll get him in trouble anyway, then great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he did give some tips right there for how to defend yourself against that stuff, go forward, and really, really kind of neat. Coming back to the, kind of the main event here, the CVE report. Why don't you guys, who wants to start with that one? Sander, is going to flip a coin?
Let's start with some, I'll just jump in, some ancient history. So we at Cyentia, a lot of the work that we do is vulnerability focused, and particularly CVE focused. And the reason being that there's good data, it's publicly available. And since we're really quantitative and data driven and try to get that kind of perspective on security, having that ID, having that framework around how we talk about vulnerabilities has been really useful for a lot of our research. But along the way, we've of course noticed a lot of weird stuff that happens within the CVE universe. And then also just kind of some interesting results that we've come across that I think that we thought would make good headlines. So we kind of outlined some of this report. We talked to F5, who've been a great partner with us on other stuff before. And we're like, hey, we're thinking about writing this report. Would you guys like to? They said, sure. So we went ahead and did this report. And I will say in the intro there, Sander was being a little modest, I did a bunch of the analysis. I did some writing, but he helped really shape the narrative and really, because I am ultimately a data guy more than I'm a security guy. I think security has the most interesting data, and that's why I operate in this space. But he helped give it some context that I think it really needed. And so we wrote this report, and basically we looked at the history of CVEs, going back all the way to the early mid 90s, or I guess late 90s is when the framework was actually created. But there are CVEs labeled with 1989, if you believe. That's insane. And kind of, we wanted to do a few things. We wanted to share those results and look at some of the quirk. So I would say, I think we included 7 weird things that, BuzzFeedy things. It's Sander, what was your favorite weird thing that we found?
Well, there was the group of them that had huge counts of CPEs.
Oh,
that was pretty fun, right? So CPE is a mapping of CVE to products. And it or actually to well, it can
all
go
the way down to
vendor
versions.
Yeah, vendor, product, and version. And Ben was able to sort of identify a couple. I don't know. Should we spoil the weird things here?
Do it, man. They can go. The report's online anyway. It's not
right. So there was one where there was a single vuln that applied to 35 different manufacturers of Chromebooks, because the flaw was in some of the code around the TPM chip and the sort of handling of the signal from the TPM chip. So 35 Chromebook manufacturers, 1 CVE, and then there was another one that I want to say had 1,500 distinct versions in it. Now I got to go check my own weird things.
Yeah.
Hold on.
No, I remember this one. So this one was also like the one that won the prize for the most versions of software was something that affected Cisco routers. But since Cisco like releases firmware like daily and like they're sequential, right? The CPE information just gets flooded with every like sequential thing. So there's like, it looks like there's tons of versions, but really it's like, it's just the way Cisco does versioning. Yeah. And I think one thing that was interesting to take away from that in particular is that like the CVE and CPE process, it's a like social process. Somebody has got to like, especially for CPEs, like catalog that information, enter it. That's hard to do in an automated way, especially for like these like widespread stuff. So I think, like David Warburton, I know you guys talked to before. He was like, so where's Log4j on that? And if you look at the Log4j, it actually, the CPE is big. Like there's a lot of entries, but it's not as big as it should be. Right? Like basically everything that ran Java in the last 20 years should be affected by Log4j, that Log4j bug, but it's not. And it's just because it is like whoever you can link, whatever software you can actually link to using a vulnerable version or there's public information about it. And there's got to be some exhaustion of like who's actually putting that together saying like, this is enough. Like I can't do anymore.
Right.
And I think this is a theme that we hit repeatedly in the report. It's like a lot of what we think about for CVEs as being like kind of grounded in reality it's part of this like social process of how we talk about vulnerabilities. So for example, another one that I really liked is if you look at kind of CVSS scores, which is something I'm kind of familiar with and working with. If you look at like the average CVSS 2 score, it's a medium. And it has been forever. If you look at the average CVSS v3 score, it's a high, and it has been forever. And this is
even
just because
for the same vuln.
Even for the same vulns, right?
Because the two things overlap for a long period of time, right? So it's like we're talking about the same set of vulns. That's what's wow.
Yeah, and so like by the way, like my data brain is like kind of hurting a little bit because CVSS is not really a number. It's like a collection of things that kind of got shoved together, but it has like no quantity beyond severity, which doesn't have a great definition anyway. But the idea being when they made CVSS v3, they said part of that revision was like, there are these things that are being scored low or lower than they should be. And so we should try to correct that when we make this new version. And so, if you had just like switched from v2 to v3 and kind of thought they were the same thing or refinement, you might've been like, God, my vulnerability list is huge now and they're all high or critical and holy cow, I got to fix all this, but nothing really changed. Like the landscape itself didn't change. The CVEs didn't change, just how we were measuring them changed. And I think that happens a lot in the world of computers. And so we got to separate that out from actual trends, actual things that are happening versus, just changes in process.
So what do you think the future will bring for CVEs? Are we going to get better at maybe...
They ain't going away.
Yeah. Just more and more.
I mean, yeah. So like, I think one of the big changes we saw was around 2016, the advent of the CNA process and that kind of expansion of that process of certified numbering authorities where you can issue your own CVs. Like, so GitHub is a huge issue, or Microsoft's a huge issue. And so, by democratizing that process a little bit, we've seen a lot more CVs out. And so like there's more. I don't know that necessarily means there's more being exploited or used, but it does mean there's more out there. So, and of course there's going to be more. We're going to see more vendors. We talk about that in the report, that kind of growth. And we even build some models, give some predictions. I think one thing that we found was interesting was kind of a move towards when we do see exploit code available. One of the repositories we see is GitHub. People are posting their code on GitHub to exercise exploits because it's easier than stuff like exploit-DB. Metasploit is kind of this walled garden that, stuff gets put in pretty regularly and there's a community around it, but it's still like a product. Whereas GitHub is just like, if I got code, I can push it. And people are, I think, increasingly.
Aaron, you are pretty closely involved with F5's CNA efforts, right?
Yep.
What does all this make you think? How do you reflect on this conversation?
So it's funny you mentioned the difficulty of maintaining like the CPE lists and all of that kind of stuff, and there is a move towards automating that as much as possible. So at one point in time, this was, even if you were a CNA, you were submitting all of that information via like a web form, right? Man, it went to a human.
Yeah.
There's the move to move all of that into an automated JSON-based system where vendors like us, like we're working towards this, right? We will just, our internal vulnerability information will essentially just be pumped straight into the vulnerability databases, right? I think that will help. It might not help so much for things like, the Log4j CPEs, because that's cross-vendor. Though when you brought that up, there's, why can't I? Vince. So Carnegie Mellon run a tool called Vince, which is like a cross-vendor collaboration tool that we use quite regularly when there are things that affect potentially multiple vendors. So like the Chromebook issue, or recently the TPM2 implementation problem. Well, there was two or more vulnerabilities in the reference implementation. But that's still quite human driven. So identifying the vendors for Vince to reach out to is kind of throwing darts at a board, right? It's a person sitting there going, well, this probably impacts this vague swag of vendors that we should reach out to.
Yeah. One of the other weird things that Ben found was that about 5% of the CVEs actually have multiple CWEs assigned to them. And I will admit on air,
not
unwisely,
supposed to happen.
I didn't even know that, because I've looked at so many CVEs that had multiple CWEs that I just assumed that when I saw one, I was like, I guess some analyst just picked one and then called it a day. I didn't even know that, right? So I learned that was an error, and then I started seeing it everywhere, and so often I would see that the NIST chose one CWE and then the vendor chose another one, and they're usually right next to each other. So it's like minor hair splitting about the nature of the vuln, and like that I think really captured what Ben was talking about. It's like we really, really want and kind of need this to be an objective system, and it's just not. It is. Yeah. It's the best thing we could say about it probably is that it's less subjective than if we didn't have it. Right. But it's still deeply, deeply subjective. So,
and I think we could always take time to be like, like kind of an if I ran the circus kind of thing and figure out, and it is like the circus is the most apt analogy for how we would do this better. But I do think like you need something, and there's going to be flaws no matter what there is. I think, both CVE, CWE, the CPE, KPEC, which is another thing, attack, all these kinds of frameworks, sticks, all these kind of frameworks, they have to serve an incredibly wide audience. And so they do try to kind of be everything to everybody, and they do like as best that they can do with that. So it's no wonder that we get these like weird contradictions and stuff. And then like a lot of the stuff, like the CWE thing, like they're not supposed to, right? You're supposed to have one CWE per CVE, but it's also guidance, right? It's not that this is guidance on the CWE website and says like, when you're doing this, do this. So nobody, and like just sending the data or the sound to be played when somebody gets a reminder for the email, right? Somebody was like, you know what? When I code up the schema, the data schema, I'm going to allow as many CWs to go in there as I want. Like the string can just be like comma separated or whatever. And so like, yeah, somebody put that feature in, and so somebody's going to use it. And this is just like it's not malicious. I don't think you could. Maybe there is something like a no-op sled in CWEs or something, but like people are going to those kind of things happen, and I think you did this wonderfully in the conclusion, and like I want to credit you for this, is talking about how like it's messed up. We've highlighted some things that are actually happening. We've highlighted some things that are just kind of illusory. But, it's better than not having this framework. And just, can you imagine just being like, oh man, did you hear about that latest Microsoft vuln?
I'll even go further. Later, after we had that conversation, I was talking with somebody else about vulnerability intelligence, because that's something you work on a lot, Ben. That's something I work on a lot. And I kind of realized that the CVE system is like the first line of vulnerability intelligence. If we didn't have that, none of the rest of the work that any of us do would really even be intelligible. Right. So it's like I used to see vendors drop in huge critical CVEs and be all annoyed at them. And I now increasingly, as a result of working on this report, I think, well, I mean, just thank our lucky stars that they found it and they published this thing and we can actually get in front of it, right? So yeah. It was funny. The more sort of issues and flaws and stuff that we discovered about this CVE system, the more I came to value it and see its importance and kind of like interpret it as a mark of maturity, right? Like the fact that we have this escalating publication rate, I don't think that's a sign that our software building standards are going down. I think it's a sign that our standards around scanning software and understanding it and threat modeling, I think they're getting better. So we should, even though it means more work for everybody, we should just be stoked that the CVE system is growing, I think.
Yeah. We've had that conversation with customers in the F5 cert, right? When we went through a period of publishing quite large blocks of CVEs, and they're like, why are you publishing so many? Well, because our software security is maturing, and it was maturing fast for a while there.
Because they're there, my friend.
Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, which would you rather me not tell you about?
Right. What is this? Like 90s Microsoft? Yeah.
Yeah. We've been through this sort of bell curve, right? I think at this point we've peaked for big IP, and now we're starting to come down the other side. We're tailing off. They're still there. That stuff is still being discovered and fixed, but it's at a slowing rate. Now I've jinxed it. Certainly something terrible will happen. But outside of that, there was something you said earlier about the disagreement between NVD and the vendor on CWEs and CVSS. We've done a ton of work ourselves on that. And so NVD have to base their CWE and CVSS score on whatever information the vendor makes public. Right? That's all they've got to go on, unless it's open source. And often the vendor has scored stuff based on information that only they know.
Yeah.
So we've done a lot of work in like our vulnerability descriptions and impact statements to make sure that we convey the reasoning behind our CVSS scores. So, like if we score something as attack complexity high, we have to make sure we explain that so that NVD agree. Once NVD has agreed with you enough and continues to agree with you, like they audit your submissions, you can actually achieve what's called provider status, where NVD will stop rescoring and reassessing your bugs. They will just periodically audit you. We, F5, achieved provider status for both CVSS and CWE recently, which is quite a big deal. Obviously, we have to work to maintain that, but that's quite a big deal.
So one more thing on that, I would also say that all those things are also subjective, right? And so like there is a person who says this is confidentiality low, and there's a rubric and there's guidance and there's all this stuff, but there's always wiggle room. And so, even if they're auditing and it's like, oh, we came with something different, but this is reasonable, then.
So we probably want to talk a little bit about EPSS still. Yeah.
So, we have talked long about CVSS already. And another effort that I've been involved in along with Jay Jacobs, and Jay is really the driving force behind this. I get to come along for the ride, is the exploit prediction scoring system, or EPSS. So this was born out of some work we did with Cyentia Security on looking at like how likely is a new vulnerability actually likely to be used in the wild. And so we've collected a ton of telemetry data from a bunch of different partners, including, other way on my camera. This was Sander who's going to jump in and tell us that F5 is providing data for EPSS. So we get all this telemetry data on like what attackers are using, which is messy and weird, and we have to do a lot of processing on. We look at a bunch of features of the vulnerability, including all that stuff that's in CVE, public mentions, weird NLP stuff, all kinds of text parsing, and we make a prediction about when it's likely that whether it's likely a new vulnerability will be exploited in the wild in the next 30 days. And so this is all publicly available. It's like CVSS. It goes through the first org. So if you go to first.org/EPSS, there is a daily changing list of CVE predictions, and it's predictions for all 195,000 CVEs there are right now. And it's the probability that we're going to see it in our telemetry sources in the next 30. And it's pretty good. Or at least we think so. We've written a couple of papers about it, and there's more coming out. And it is just, it's a cool community driven effort. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of months ago, Jay, the guy that Ben was just talking about, noticed what my team was putting out in terms of some vuln targeting intelligence and asked if we wanted to participate. And it so happens that our output is really good training input for their model. And so in our own tiny way, F5 is contributing to this system. We're really sort of proud and excited to be participating, partly because it's open source, partly because the system itself is fantastic. And we've learned a lot about vuln intelligence just by talking with these guys.
That's really awesome. I got to tell you, it's funny. I always wonder kind of what ends up happening with the data that we gather. And it's good to know that we're able to contribute to a greater good and go community. That's communities. And that's the theme at RSA this year, coincidentally. So
it's community. Yeah.
Community.
That is one of the harder things for us to get to, is like, who is attacking what, and we get it from a bunch of different sources, but people are really cagey about, like, we saw attackers hitting this. And so the fact that we can kind of collaborate, get this all together in a public thing, I think that helps, that it's a public thing, a public good is really great.
Thank you so much for coming on this month, Ben. I loved having you on, and I look forward to seeing you guys at RSA. We're going to do a follow-up on how that, spoiler alert, community, we're going to do a follow-up on how the talk goes. So
you got to come.
Thanks.
Just boost our numbers.
Yeah.
I'll be there, and I'll be pumping it on all the socials and the YouTubes and whatnot. So okay. Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
take care. Nobody close your browser.
Thanks for tuning in to This Month in Security, a DevCentral podcast. I'm Aubrey from DevCentral. I want to thank Aaron and Sander for joining me this month, as well as our guest, Ben Edwards from the Cyentia Institute. If you are still listening, don't forget to hit like or subscribe and maybe give us a rating. That way we'll catch up with you next month, too. Until then, bye for now.